Hey guys, this is Kevin with my review for Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw. And what Hobbs and Shaw is essentially about is, of course, we center on, well, Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw. These are two guys who, as we know, they have a very contentious relationship. They really don't like each other at all. However, when this new virus leaks and you have this new character known as who dubs himself as the Black Superman that wants to obtain this virus that puts Deckard Shaw's sister at risk, these two basically have to try to work together in order to get away from who basically also has obtained the virus, and they have to try to get away from this character, and that's really all there is to say. It's these two having to put aside their differences and work together and stop this villain. So, Hobbs and Shaw overall, I was very conflicted when it came to this movie, because on one hand, I was all for this movie happening. I mean, Hobbs and Shaw were definitely one of the best things about the previous Fast and Furious film. Their banter was so great, I loved their chemistry, and I was really looking forward to seeing them get a solo film, but on the other hand, I also didn't really know if this was going to work, especially, you know, not having the rest of the crew there and things like that. I just didn't really know how this was going to turn out. I also was worried it was going to be just a little too over the top and things like that. But I have to say, overall, I had a good time with this movie. Hobbs and Shaw is basically what we've come to expect from this series, and that is in good ways and bad. And it definitely is, I think, the perfect movie to be released around the midpoint of the summer. But we're just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast. And right off the bat, that's definitely one of the best things about this entire film. I think really the entire cast does a really great job here. And one of the things I can say for sure is that every single cast member here, every single actor, they know exactly what kind of movie they're in. They're not taking this too seriously at all, and that's something I definitely really did appreciate, and that's especially the case when it comes to Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. These two are just so great. They really do work off each other quite well. Johnson's, very, bulky and just very, charismatic type persona, and then you have Statham's more snarky type attitude. It really does blend quite well together. Those two one-up each other constantly, and it's just so entertaining to watch. Just the back and forth between them is the best stuff about this movie. Their chemistry is probably when this movie is at its strongest, and I really love seeing these two work together. And moving forward, if we were to get another Hobbs and Shaw film, I would be down just to see these two interact again, because there's just something about watching these two men completely one-up each other and just, trading insults. It's just really entertaining to watch, and they both do a really great job. They both have, some really great action moments too, but you can tell how much fun they really are having in this role, and I think that really, they bring out the best in each other, and I think they did some really great work here for sure. I really love them in this film. But another great addition, though, is Vanessa Kirby as Shaw's sister. I really liked her here a lot. Hattie is a character that is definitely one-dimensional. There isn't really anything that complex about her, but she's also a badass, and she's very entertaining to watch. I felt like she fit in with the trio pretty much right away. I really did like her here for sure. She has some really great chemistry between, with the two other men. I think they worked very well here, and I definitely really did like her in the film for sure. And the same goes for Idris Elba, who I thought, more than anyone, I mean, he knows exactly what kind of movie he's in. He is really hamming it up in this role. He gets some really great one-liners, and you can tell he really is trying to be like classic, cheesy 90s villains. That's exactly what he's channeling here, and I think he did a really great job with that. I think he could have taken this role way too seriously, and that's something I was ultimately a bit worried about, but no, he seemed to be having tons of fun here, and I really did like him here for sure. And the same really does go for everyone else. Eiza Gonzalez, even though she's not in this movie that much, she's really great. Helen Mirren I did like as well. Eddie Marzin. I mean, really everyone, like I said, the best thing I can say is that everyone knows what kind of movie they're in, and you can tell they're just having a ton of fun being in there, and that's something I can definitely say for the entire cast in this film. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because that's something I was not really all that worried about. Even though I was worried about this movie, I was not worried about the director, because it is David Leitch, who is no stranger to movies like this, and I thought he did a really great job. And something that David Leitch has done so well is that because he's directed, you know, Deadpool 2 and things like that, he has a real ear when it comes to, you know, comedy and things like that, and he really leans heavily into that here. This film, more than ever, is basically a comedy, and I really did appreciate that for sure. I laughed a lot harder in this movie than I really was expecting, and I think he did a really great job with that, and he knows when to take this movie seriously. You know, he does a good job with that for sure. That being said, I did not feel the balance was as tight as it could have been, and that's sort of a nitpick here. When the film does get serious, it feels a little bit jarring, mainly because the movie's trying to be just really fun and not take itself seriously at all. So when those more serious moments come in, it doesn't really work as well as it should. But again, I feel like David Leitch, he had a good idea of what this movie needed to be, and I will definitely give him that for sure. And I think he did a good job for the most part. The writing as well here, again, this is one of those movies where you just can't really think all that hard about it, because if you do, you'll just find yourself hating it. And if you think about some things for way too long, you will find yourself hating it. And look, that's something that, you know, if you've watched these movies, you've come to understand that, and that's something that this movie definitely understands. It really does double down on just how far we can push the ridiculousness of this franchise, and that's something that I really did appreciate for sure, is that it is just trying to be really silly and dumb, and I think they definitely do a good job with that for sure. And again, what they do with Hobbs and Shaw, the way they bring them in there, just seeing those two banter back and forth, it's a lot of fun, and the inclusion of Hattie and things like that, it is actually really good, and they do some really good stuff there. And the movie does actually do a pretty good job of fleshing out these characters a bit more, especially when it comes to Shaw. He has a shared past with Brixton, the villain of this movie, and you kind of get to see why he's gone in this more heroic direction. You know, Faye the Furious, it felt like he was kind of forced to go there, but no, now you're seeing like how he has changed his tune a bit, and I actually did think they did a good job with that, and I like the way they kind of fleshed him out a bit more. Of course, again, it's nothing like really expansive, but they really do build on it a little bit more than you are expecting, and that's something I did appreciate about his character, is how much he has changed for sure, and I think they did a good job with that. And same goes for Hobbs. They give him a lot more to do as well, although that does lead to my one big negative in this movie, is that the actual narrative that we have here, it's just not as tight as it should be. It's a very, very simple story. It's just, there's this virus, and, you know, Hattie Shaw, of course, Shaw's sister, you know, she has it, and they are now on the run from Brixton, who wants the virus for his company, and that's kind of all there is. Like, they're on the run, and they're trying to do what they can to extract the virus and get away from him. Like, that's kind of all we're dealing with here. And again, I don't really have a huge problem with that, because it makes for a lot of fun moments between Hobbs and Shaw, and just seeing those two interact is just so damn entertaining. There are just so many moments that those two just work so well together, but that can only go so far. There's a point in this movie about halfway, well, not halfway through, but like the last like 40-ish minutes of this movie, and you think it's over. You think this is where things are starting to wrap up, and then you realize, wait, we still have like 40 minutes of movie to go, and that's when we get to the Samoa part of this movie, which, you know, you saw it in the trailer, and when we got to that, it felt like a completely different movie. Everything we're now seeing, it felt like it was just there because, oh, Shaw has a lot of character development, you know, Hobbs does not really have as much. Let's just give him this random, you know, detour where we go off to Samoa so we can flesh him out a bit more. And, like, sure, what they're doing is kind of interesting, but it didn't feel needed for this movie. It felt like something they could have saved for the second film, and that's something I think that they definitely need to pump the brakes out. They basically threw everything in this movie, when I feel like they could have just kept this a simple story, and they didn't. They tried to, not necessarily overcomplicate, but they tried to make it something more than it was in the third act, and that definitely did bother me. It also didn't help that the political commentary was really shoved in your face with what they were trying to do. Again, it just, and again, they try to do a lot with Hobbs' character, but it feels rushed because there was nothing in the beginning of the movie that was really setting up this specific storyline, and it just feels shoehorned in because of that, and I hate saying that, and again, I don't like to pick too much when it comes to the writing, but that is something that is legitimately a problem for me. I do not think it was nearly as well written as it could have been, and again, the film is very self-aware, like, it knows exactly what it is, but I just felt that the third act of this movie, it turned into almost a completely different movie, and it was just, it didn't feel the same at all. It felt like we had stepped into, like, the sequel to Hobbs and Shaw or something like that. It was just, it was weird. It was very weird the way they did that. Also, as much as I did like Hattie Shaw in this movie, there is a very shoehorned romance in there between her and Hobbs. They try to do a lot of stuff where pretty much immediately they hint at some sort of pairing between them, and at first it kind of worked because, you know, they're joking about it and things like that, but then they actually start to dive into it, and it gets really cheesy, really on the nose, very cheesy, and for some reason, the movie chooses to have all of Hobbs' like emotional scenes with Hattie rather than Shaw, and I feel like that was a mistake. I feel like we needed more between them. It's fun to see them one-up each other, but this should also be a movie where these two have a bigger understanding of each other, where they start to, you know, put aside their differences in a way and kind of have more respect for each other, and I thought they were going to do that, but the scene that they could have had with Shaw, they gave to Hattie, and that was very strange. I don't really know why they decided to go in that direction. I feel like that was definitely a mistake. They could have easily given that to Shaw, and they didn't, and that was definitely a bit of a letdown for me. So yeah, those things kind of do bring the film down for sure. In terms of the villain, Brixton, when I first walked out of this movie, I didn't really like him all that much. I thought he was relatively boring and generic, but then I thought, you know what, this is a Fast and Furious movie. It doesn't really need that complicated of a villain. And because of the fact that they actually do try to give him a little bit more to do between him and Shaw, I feel like in some ways this is kind of the villain that this movie needed. Like, this is the kind of villain that we would expect in this kind of franchise, and it does work here. However, I also do think he was just a little too overpowered. Like, after a while, it just, I know it's supposed to be silly, but just him being the superhuman, it's a little bit hard to buy into. They do what they can to get you to buy into it, but it's just a little bit hard to do that, and again, I think Elba definitely elevates it, especially the stuff between him and Shaw definitely elevate it. And there definitely are times where it works quite well. There are a few times where it's just a little hard to fully buy into, and especially scenes with him on his own, I definitely found pretty boring. Like, I did not really care about Brixton Lore as a character. It was more of just he was an enjoyable villain. He was enjoyable in the moment, but I would not say he's like a great villain or anything like that. He was an average villain. Like, that's the best way to sum it up. You know, at first I thought he was bad, but the more I thought about it, he's an average villain. But he is the kind of villain that you would expect in a movie like this, and I think they did a good job with that for the most part. So, in terms of comedy, which, like I said, this film definitely has quite a lot of, there are two cameos in particular that I really wasn't expecting at all, but both of them I very much welcomed. In fact, I hesitate to even call them cameos because they had a lot more to do than I was expecting, especially the first one. There was a lot more going on with this actor than I was expecting for them to have, and I love that. And especially where they're headed for the next movie, which they likely are going to be in there. I am very much down for what they're doing. I love the inclusion of these actors. I love how they were able to keep them secret, because you can't really do that a lot nowadays, but they were able to do that here, and thank God for that, because I love what we got here for sure. So that definitely worked, and I do think, again, the movie is a lot of fun. So again, while there are things that I am picking at, the movie is a lot of fun, and that's really what elevates it. It's just the fun, and especially when it comes to the cinematography. I mean, look, even though this movie completely defies any laws of physics and any sort of, realistic stuff, that's completely thrown out the window. Any logic, I mean, that's just not something to think about when you watch a movie like this. It more than makes up for that in the cinematography. The cinematography here is so great. These movies have a real style to them at this point. They know exactly what they need to be, and they really do go all out here. That being said, most of the action scenes in this movie, while really good, some of them can get a little bit repetitive at points, and I do think they could have done a little bit more there, but there are some really great action scenes for sure, especially this one involving this room that the two of them have to go into. It was honestly pretty badass, and I really love the way it was done. And yes, the scene with all the interlocking cars is just as amazing to behold as you think it is, and I think they did a really great job with that for sure. So in terms of action sequences, they definitely did step it up here, and I really do appreciate that, and I think they did a good job with that here. Even though at points the movie does very much feel like it's written just so we can have another action sequence, I didn't really care because they're always very entertaining and fun. So I think they did a good job with that. The score as well, not really much to it. It's a fun score for the most part. And the editing, that's my other thing. I really do think this movie is a little too long. All the Fast and Furious movies have been around this length, but this movie, because of how simplistic it was, it really only needs to be like an hour and 40 at most. It did not need to be like 2 hours at all. I think it's definitely a little bit too long. And like I said, in that second act, you really do feel like things are kind of starting to wrap up, and then it just takes a complete detour, and it doesn't really feel like the same movie. And a lot of that is due to the editing here. The first two acts, I think, are very well paced. They know exactly what they are. They're very self-aware in that way. But the third act is when things got a little messy for me, and I think they could have done a better job with that. So it just becomes a little bit choppy overall. And then really the only other issue I do have with Hobbs and Shaw is one that might not bother a lot of people, but is something that I was a little bit annoyed by. As you guys know, one of the big reasons this film is happening is because of that feud between Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel, which was really something that I was worried about. And yeah, you can tell that at this point, they are separate entities. They are not at all referencing the events of the previous Fast and Furious films. The only, connection is that these two have interacted before in Fate of the Furious, but other than that, there's no mention of Dom, there's no mention of any of that, and while I get it, definitely, I get what they're trying to do, I think that they could have had a little bit more of a connection. Just give me a brief reference, just to show that, like, we haven't, we're not completely acting like those movies never happened, because that's just a bit of a stretch, and that was definitely something that I noticed for sure, and kind of just annoyed me a little bit. It's not a huge flaw or anything, but it's something that I was a little bit irritated by. So like I said, while I do think this film definitely has some severe pacing issues and definitely did feel like it took that random detour, at the end of the day, this is still a really entertaining film. I, for the most part, got what I wanted from Hobbs and Shaw. That chemistry between the two is so strong. They work so well together. Kirby is a very nice addition for sure, even though I wasn't particularly fond of some of the things they do with her. There are definitely quite a few things that they could have touched up upon, and while, like I said, you can nitpick the shit out of this movie, you can just completely hate it for all of its logic issues. I mean, that last climax alone, I mean, it makes us believe that there is a way for cars to be interlocked simply just by grabbing onto the other, and that somehow Dwayne Johnson is able to control a plane, control all of it by just grabbing onto this chain. I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous, but that's what I want from this series. I don't want to take this that seriously. I want this to be really dumb, and that's what I got. I wanted a really stupid, fun time, and that's exactly what I got here, and I think if that's what you want, I think you'll overall be satisfied. Just go in knowing this isn't going to be on the level of the Fast and Furious movies, and I think overall you're going to enjoy yourself for the most part. So yes, it definitely does have some issues for sure. I do think it is definitely not on the level of the last two Fast and Furious films, which I do think both of them were really good. And I am a little bit worried as to where they're going with that series, but if they want to do more Hobbs and Shaw movies, I honestly would be down for it. I like the direction that they are going in, and I think this could definitely be a really fun series for sure that I think I could just have a really good time with. It's a series that if you don't take it too seriously, I think you'll have a really good time with it, and that's exactly the same when it comes to this movie. So overall, I really did enjoy this one, and I am going to give Hobbs and Shaw overall a B-. But overall, guys, in my review of Hobbs and Shaw, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, leave your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.